And I want to go through everything in complete detail here. We'll look at front-end framework, what I use on the server side, the API layer, so how we're actually connecting the front and back end, state management for the front end, the UI libraries or any kind of UI framework that I'm using, what I use for authentication, if any third-party services or roll in your own solution, what I use to host apps, both in industry and as a solo founder as well. We'll then check out what I'm using for database, and that's a fairly consistent one across the board, and all of the extra stuff that you might need for building apps like queues, vector databases, and we'll even look into a little bit of AI stuff and check out how I'm building AI agents. So a lot of the tech that I talk about here is going to be mainly from the perspective of web development, because that's what I do as a full-time job. I'm a web developer. So even when I'm working in industry as a contractor for certain clients and then working as a solo founder as well, a lot of that technology crosses over, mainly because I don't want to keep relearning new tools just to develop pretty much the same kind of applications. This is true as well for both web and mobile. There's a lot of crossover there as well. So let's just jump into the first one, which is front-end framework. For the front end, I'm using React pretty much across the board with TypeScript. The reason being that, as I mentioned, I'm not just working on solo projects, I also work as a full-time contractor as well. And by far, like not even close, React and TypeScript and that kind of ecosystem is the most desirable skill set in the market at the moment. Almost 99% of the jobs that I get offered are for React and TypeScript stack. Now, I'm probably living in a little bit of an echo chamber because obviously I'm in that tech stack, so people are more likely to also offer me new contracts and new jobs in that space. But even if you jump onto a lot of job boards, you'll see that most jobs are in that area as well. Mainly because you can just do so much with it. You can build websites, mobile apps, you can do a lot of server-side rendering, you can build CLIs even in React. And particularly when I'm doing solo projects, I don't want to learn a whole second framework when I already have the skill set from doing contract work in that one framework already. Because it's not just about the application code you're writing, it's the entire ecosystem around that as well. Like if I want to implement forms or routing or auth, I already know all of the best packages for those kind of requirements. Whereas if I was to say, start using Svelte on side projects, I'd have to relearn all of the ecosystem and also keep up with that ecosystem as well. So by just using the same tools across all of the different areas of working, it means that I can be the best at that one area. And I'm not constantly trying to keep up with the industry and learn new tech every time I want to start a new project. Because despite everything that I'm saying in this video, typically the best tech stack is the one you already know. Obviously there's a lot of exceptions to that rule, but generally the thing you're most proficient in, particularly when working as a solo founder, is the tool that you should use. Don't just get caught up with trying to relearn the latest framework or think that you need the latest tool to do a good job. If you just stick to the industry standard tools, you'll be really employable and you'll just be able to move fast across the board. Now, this also transfers over to mobile as well, where I just use React Native. And again, the reason is that I want to be able to transfer my skills from web over to mobile. I made a different video about this recently, you can check it out here, where I go deep into why React Native is so performant these days compared to what it used to be. So if you've heard a lot of talk about how building apps with React Native maybe isn't the best tool to choose from a performance perspective, that is just not true anymore. You can build really performant apps that run really well, even on old Android devices, using React Native. You don't have to relearn the native platforms, iOS, Android. If you already know React, you can easily stick with React Native, have really good developer experience with things like hot reloading. The ecosystem around it is really fantastic as well, particularly with all of the build tools that they provide with Expo application services, and you'll just be able to hit the ground running, particularly if you already have a lot of experience in React. For server side, I also just stick to the same tech stack using Node.js, TypeScript there as well. And the main reason is, again, that seems to be a really highly employable skill set. It's very sought after, particularly if you're in the contract market, because typically you're going into companies to build specific projects quickly, get them into production, and then just move on to the next company. You don't really see many people in the industry these days that are just purely back-end or purely front-end developers, at least from my own experience. Typically, people want to hire product engineers that can work across the full stack, and that means learning tools like TypeScript and React and all of the ecosystem around that means that you can easily move between these different areas and work on all sorts of different tools, be it front-end, mobile, desktop apps, servers, and anything in between. I don't really buy into the idea that you're going to be reusing application code across the front and back end. Typically that doesn't actually happen. But what you can reuse is all of the build tools and all of the developer stuff, running unit tests, doing deployments, linting, prettier, all of that kind of stuff can be reused across the front and back end. So you don't have to, again, relearn a new ecosystem, new frameworks, new ways of working. You can just continue to get stronger in the skills that you already have. And for the most part, that can be the best tool for the job. I've been doing this for 15 years now. Of course, across that time, I have come across many other technologies. C#, Objective-C, PHP and Laravel are also really popular. So I have a decent amount of skill in all of those technologies as well. But by far, what I tend to see the most is TypeScript. Now let's talk a little bit about the API layer, so the bit that connects the back and the front end together. For the past, I'd say 5 years, I've been heavily invested in GraphQL. And the reason for that is that, again, it seems to be a pretty well-accepted technology in industry. And so something that I've got pretty good at. In fact, I'd say now that I'm actually faster at implementing services with GraphQL than I am with just standard REST. So the whole idea that GraphQL can be too complicated or it's too much to solve certain problems just isn't true for me. And I actually think it's not true for most use cases. A lot of the problems people think of in relation to GraphQL being complicated is just that they don't have as much experience with that particular technology. Once you get up to speed with how to actually query and change data and how the schema works, then you get so many benefits off the back of it, including things like end-to-end type safety and automated document generation. Of course, you can achieve these things with other tools like tRPC or using REST with the OpenAPI spec, but these systems aren't standardized. At least with GraphQL, you know that no matter what project you move on to or you're working on, they're all going to be following the same GraphQL spec. And I'm not saying there that it is always the best tool for the job, but at least for me, I'm able to move quicker with it and I get all of these extra benefits. So typically for me, it's the first choice even over a REST API. For state management, so back on the front end here, I'm a massive advocate of keeping things super simple and saying that less is more. And over the course of working in tech, I've used tons of state management solutions, particularly Redux was a really popular one, less so now. But from using all of these, I've ended up just getting to a point where I'm using just standard React state and context. And this, for me at least, seems to solve 99% of my use cases. Very rarely do I need to turn to specific state management tools beyond what you get from just vanilla React. As I mentioned previously as well, I'm using GraphQL, which means on the front end, I get the benefit of all of the GraphQL clients, Urkel, Apollo client. They provide a cache, so all of the data layer stuff is pretty much managed. And even if you're using something like REST, you can still use packages like React Query to manage all of that stuff and keep things cached. That you don't necessarily have to have a separated client state in tools like Redux. Of course, there are certain use cases where you'd want to use tools like this, Jotai, Zustand, Redux, whatever. But for the most part, for me, I just stick with vanilla React, state and context. Now for UI library, this is a fairly interesting one. I'm really not a big fan of Tailwind just because I really don't like the way that it makes the DOM look. And I find this is pretty common consensus when I talk to a lot of other engineers. Just adding all of those classes to the DOM really doesn't look that good from my perspective. And I prefer to use tools that offer more than just the style. So for me at the moment, I pretty much use Chakra UI across the board. With the release of Chakra 3, it's actually really similar to other tools like ShadCN, where you can import snippets for the particular components that you want to work on. So I think when you're choosing a UI library, if you want all of the functionality stuff on top of it as well, then the main thing that you should be looking at is how close in appearance it is to the actual goal UI that you want to achieve. So for me, Chakra UI already has a lot of the look and feel for the kind of apps that I want to build, and it's really feature rich as well. Like, look at all the components here on the side that we've got available to us. I've also been using this for years as well, mainly Chakra 2. So a lot of the concepts are still pretty familiar, even though version 3 was basically a complete rewrite. It just means that, again, you can move really quickly, you're familiar with the patterns, and you can just get shit done a lot quicker than if you're just constantly trying to learn new UI libraries, new tools all the time. So now just looking over at authentication, I pretty much just roll my own solution, or at least use tools that I can install as NPM packages. every time I implement Auth. I never use third-party tools like Auth0 because I've tried to use those in the past and they end up just being way more of a headache than the problems they're trying to solve. And also the cost can go up hugely, even for really simple projects. So I would just recommend using tools like Nextauth. If you're using Next, they have tons of integrations with a bunch of different providers. So if you want to do login with Google, Microsoft, Instagram, Facebook, all of that is already done for you. You just install the core library, set up the provider based on their documentation, and it's really easy to set up Auth in basically 15 minutes. There's other packages that I've heard of more recently as well, like BetterAuth, and this looks like a pretty solid solution. It's not tied to Next.js, so if you want to use it independently of that, it's a really good option. So I think I'm going to give it a go in my next project. It seems pretty solid, well reviewed. A lot of stars on GitHub. We've got 12.2 thousand at this point, but just use a popular package that works with your ecosystem, one that's well supported, well liked, so you can get the support if anything goes wrong. But don't be convinced by vendors that tell you that Auth is complicated. It's really not that difficult, particularly if you're using these pre-built packages and then just integrating with OAuth 2 providers like Google or Facebook. For mobile and the latest app that I built, I just rolled my own solution because we only have one login option at the moment, which is via Apple. So once you log in with Apple, with the login button provided by Expo, your only job at that point is managing the JWT token, and that's a fairly simple flow. Again, don't get caught up with the idea that Auth needs to be complicated. For simple apps, the authentication system can also be really simple. For hosting, and this is going to sound a bit mad, but I always just stick to Heroku for everything. Heroku's been around for ages now, and it's pretty much the only product I know of that has support for all of the requirements that I need. One, you don't get issues with cold starts because it's not serverless. The servers are always turned on. They've got native integrations for things like Postgres, Redis, and a bunch of extra tools that you might need, including static storage. It already does things like automatic deploys, similar to what you'd get with a lot of other popular tools. And again, I've just been using it for such a long time that I'm really quick with it. As you can probably tell, I'm not a big advocate of just constantly relearning new tools, new systems, just to solve the exact same problems. Once you've been doing this long enough and you've got past that initial 5+ years of constantly relearning the latest framework, you'll realize that there's actually very little benefit from doing that, and just sticking to the tools and the ecosystem you're already familiar with will get you most of the way. Users don't care where you're hosting your app or what framework you wrote it in. All they care is, does it solve their problem? Does it look good enough? Is it fluid enough? Is it quick? So just focus on those areas rather than just getting caught up in constantly trying to learn new things. So if I'm building more full-on web apps, I will just go with Heroku, host the front-end portion there and the API there, typically just deploy it as a mono repo. And if it's more of a front-end only app, like my website, overstacked.io, I will just host that on Netlify instead. Typically because this is a slightly better tool if you're just doing static deployments, if you're just pre-compiling a web page and just serving it. They do also have serverless functions, and there is a small server component to this website which is also hosted on Netlify. So if anyone signs up to the course that I've got hosted on this website, all of the back-end logic is again hosted and managed on Netlify. But just be aware that if cold starts are a problem and you want an API endpoint to be really quick, then Netlify, and I even think Vercel, is probably not the right way to go because of the cold start problem. For database, I pretty much just stick to Postgres across the board. It's super fast, it scales really well. You can hold tiny amounts of data in there or massive amounts of data in there, and there's just no issue whatsoever. It's super widely supported across a lot of platforms. So if you're hosting on Vercel, Netlify, Heroku, they've either got native integrations or third-party integrations already set up. So it's equally great if you're working on small MVPs or massive enterprise projects. It's also really, really extensible, which I'll touch on in just a second. So looking at all the extra stuff that you might need for building web apps like queues or vector databases, again, because Postgres is so extensible, you can just stick to that. Postgres can be a relational database, a queue, a vector database with either using the native features of Postgres or just installing third-party plugins onto Postgres itself. And then just quickly to touch on, if you're integrating any kind of AI or LLM features into your apps, a really cool tool that I came across recently is called LangGraph. And LangGraph comes in both a Python form and a Node.js form. So if you do want to build any kind of agent flows or have more complicated logic than just calling the native LLM directly, like OpenAI or Claude, then check out LangGraph for that. You can plug in tools, so give your LLM web access or access to documents like PDFs really easily, rather than having to go and manually wire all of that up together or trying to work out how to integrate all of the tool calling features with the particular LLM that you're currently using. With LangGraph, you can set up your flow once and then you can switch out to Claude, OpenAPI, Grok, just by changing one line of code, and then all of the agent flow continues to work exactly as it did before. So here's an example on the LangGraph website. You just configure your agent, call him create React agent, pass in the LLM that you want to access. In this case, they're using OpenAI. You can provide a bunch of tools as well. So in this case, they provided search results, which means that this agent can now access the web. And then once you've got your agent returned, you can just invoke it with a message and it can just follow the particular flow that you've set up, call the tools, and then give you a much better response than if you were to just call an LLM API directly. So I think that pretty much covers everything. Again, the best tool for you to be using is probably the one that you already know. But I will say, from working in industry myself, the whole TypeScript React stack is really, really employable at the moment. So if you're trying to get into the tech industry or want to remain more employable, then I would highly recommend exploring that kind of stack. If you like this kind of video, guys, and want to see more like it, please let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.